Good afternoon to our friends that are joining us with a book review. And we hope that you can tell with our red and black, our Georgia Bulldog coffee mug, that we are celebrating Monday night back to back. Oh, so exciting.
Yes.
So hope you will indulge. I have on my mother's necklace. You probably can't even see it, but Mom would wear this necklace with a Georgia G on it. And my bracelet that my daughter Laura gave has a bulldog on it. So we are just sporting our colors, and
we just can't help it because we grew up, Gail, in a family that loved the Bulldogs from the time we were born.
Absolutely. Well, and we lived in Athens.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, and I think I might have mentioned this previously on an earlier video, but our mother used to iron on Saturdays while we listened to the game, and Larry Munson would be the one that would be broadcasting it. So exciting.
Can't beat that. Oh,
and
yeah. Mom and Dad had season tickets for many, many years.
Yes,
so
yes.
We are dyed-in-the-wool Bulldog fans, so we're excited.
We are,
but we're also excited about our books. So,
they
have nothing to do, of course, with the Bulldogs, but we do, and so hope you will celebrate with us.
Well, I'm going to start out today, and just by coincidence, all of my books are nonfiction.
Interesting.
And I enjoyed every one of them. This first one, called Growing Up by Russel Baker, and you can see all my little note tabs I have in it. Now that they're mostly the books that are mine, that we got from Books for Keeps, I can write in them and put little sticky things on them.
Right.
Loved this book. It was written in 1982. And Russel Baker was born in the 1920s, and he died in the 20-teens. He was like 93 years old. I'll let y'all do the math.
That's like our dad.
Yes.
Very similar.
He lived a long life, grew up in Virginia, and grew up in a family that didn't have a lot materially, but basically because the Great Depression hit, almost nobody during that time did. His father passed away when he was young. He was about 5 years old, and his mother took him and his sister Doris to live actually with one of her brothers. And so they ended up living there for 6 years. And he writes about the memories. It is so touching, and maybe more so if you're a little older, because we can remember our parents talking about that time. We can relate to the families with no TV, and we can relate to a lot of the just beginning to come out of that era when we had the Depression and then we had World War II. So he is there with his uncle and aunt, and while they're there, 2 more uncles move in. So they have a crowded home, and they would sit around and talk around the table at night, the adults. He said, because talking didn't cost anything.
That's right.
And they really couldn't afford to go to the movies or anything like that. And he would be allowed, if he had had his homework done, he could stay up till 10 o'clock and listen to them talk. And I just want to read what he says in his own words because it's so warm and touching. At New Street, we lived on coffee and talk. If my homework was done, I could sit with them and listen till 10 o'clock struck. I loved the sense of family warmth that radiated through those long kitchen nights of talk. There were many chords resonating beneath it, and though I could not identify them precisely, I was absorbing a sense of them and storing them away in my memory. Well, Russell's mother was a very strong and a determined woman, and she was always telling him that she wanted him to make something of himself. And he was a very good student from the get-go, and she had been a teacher, and she really instructed him and taught him, and he had to get a little job selling newspapers to help bring in a few dollars, and he ended up going to college, and he ended up in the service. He was in the Navy Flyers. He was a pilot in the Navy, but he never really had to go fight. The war ended before he had to, and he always hated that, but he said he knew his mother was ecstatic, and so he couldn't fault her for her prayers being answered about that.
Absolutely.
Well, he met a lady called Mimi. And back in these days, we're talking about in the late 40s, early 50s, there was a big difference between a good lady, the lady you would marry, and just a lady for a good time. Well, Mimi had grown up in a very rough life, and she ended up growing up in an orphanage, so to speak, and she was pretty much out on her own very early in life. She was gorgeous, and she was mature, she was smart, she didn't have a lot of education, but she was a lady that he just grew to love tremendously. And he brought her home to see Mama, and after Sunday dinner, when she left, Mama looked at him and said, well, you know, she would be a fairly attractive lady if she didn't wear so much makeup.
Oh, dear.
So, for many, many years, he would see Mimi, but tell her that marriage was not in the cards for them. Well, after about 6 years, it was most definitely in the cards. They got married. They had 4 children. They lived many, many years together. I think she passed away maybe 2 years before him. And this book is just wonderful. You will learn a lot about America, about the way it was back during the Depression and World War II, about how the families stuck together, sometimes moved in together, did everything they could to help one another. And I just loved it. He became a journalist. He worked for the New York Times for many years, and then he was on the PBS Masterpiece Theater for years, the host for that.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
So he went into that, and one more thing. When he found out he might like writing, he was like in high school, and he had assigned an essay. They had to write an essay, and he just couldn't think of anything to write. And he was thinking about spaghetti and how when they had the big family over, they would always sometimes eat spaghetti, and it was so hilarious how different ways people would eat it. And he wrote his essay on that. And at class, the teacher handed out all the essays but his. So he was like, oh no, because he thought it was going to be kind of a silly, much too light of an essay. But at the end of the class, the teacher said, I want to read you an essay that really shows you how to catch people's attention and to keep it and to make it something interesting as well as informative. So he read his essay out loud, and it really meant a lot to him, and that kind of was the first spur to him that he might be a writer one day.
I
Loved the book. Give it a 5. I recommend it. Written in 1982. I know you can still find it, though, probably at used bookstores.
Sounds like a good one.
Warm your heart. Warm your heart.
Well, it's interesting that you said all of yours are nonfiction, and it just so happens that all of mine are stories about family situations, family secrets. So my first one is A Spool of Blue Thread by Ann Tyler.
One of my favorites of hers.
And that's why I picked it up. I picked it up first. You had said, oh, Gail, you just have got to read that book. And so this was the first one. It is set in the area of Baltimore, a nice area of Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And the Whitshanks is the family. Now it does a lot of flashback, which I like that. Ann Tyler is a wonderful author. Her characterization and the way that she brings out all of the different traits of each person is just magical almost.
It is.
But the flashback, sometimes I would get a little bit confused. I don't know if it was me and my age or what, but I'd have to stop for just a minute now. Is this the oldest, of the family?
Right.
Because there was the oldest father and son, Junior and Lillian, or Junior and Lenny, I believe was her name. And they actually came from an area that was poor, just farmers. And Junior he had his eyes set on making something of himself. This was back in the 20s, like you say. It was 20s, 30s. They had gone through depression and really were struggling, and he realized he was good at construction and building, and so he set out to make something of himself in that way, and he did. And he was almost like an architect, and yet he didn't have the education. He just had the experience, the practical experience, and the apprenticeship and whatever. So there was a very wealthy person in Baltimore, Maryland, that was building a huge mansion. I don't know if you remember reading it, and he had picked Junior to be the head contractor and to help with the building, and because he was so good with the details and the beauty. And Junior was able to actually convince him and his wife, the man that was building the house, to build it like
he wanted.
Yes, because I promise you, he was like, one day this is going to be my house.
All right.
One day, me and my wife and my family are going to live in. He just had this dream, this inner dream that was going to happen, and it did. So that was part of that. And then, of course, they had children. Red and Abby are the two main characters that go throughout most of the book, and they came together around the 1959, 60s. They had 4 children. 3 of them natural, 1 of them was not their own. But Abby was she was just the sweetest soul and loved everyone, and had gotten a degree in social work, and she just was constantly helping people, bringing them home. So one of the children, STEM, it's not really a birth child, so that actually causes a little bit of a problem for the one and only son. There were 2 daughters, then these 2 sons, and yet it was sort of buried for a long, long time.
Oh, so they didn't know. It's been a long time since I've read it. Right. I'll be honest. They didn't know at first that he was adopted.
They didn't.
Okay.
And yet there was just a feeling of something's not
different.
Quite, yeah, something's different. A little bit of different attention. So that causes some problems with this one particular son, and I really think that it affected him in the way that he lived his life. He just was determined to do his own thing, and if they needed him, he might come home and he might not.
The birth son,
Denny.
Yeah.
And he might live in California for a while and work for. So
well, he might have thought you had a son. So why?
Yeah.
Was he trying to be replaced, or did they feel like they didn't have enough in him? You could see how someone would think that.
And I love that Anne does not come to any conclusions. You sort of come to some conclusions through little things that happen or through this situation. And actually, the title, you don't realize why she picked that title. It's the last chapter. I want to say it's the last chapter or the next to the last chapter. And so I just can't say enough about, reading it. You will relate in some way. You will find someone in your family will relate to someone that's in the family. And the overriding theme is, to my
what you got
opinion and what I got from it and what I believe probably most people would, is forgiveness is so important when there's real love and there's the connection of being family. Naturally, there are going to be things that are not done exactly right.
And you're not going to like everything about every person in the family.
Exactly.
That's a lot of her strength in all of her books. She puts those people out there just how they are. And the great thing is the fact that you can love them without always liking everything about them, which would be impossible, really. I mean, think about it.
And forgiveness is so important.
Yes, and acceptance too.
Yes,
accepting someone not being exactly like you hoped they would be or expected them to be.
Exactly. So I highly recommend this book. I could talk more about it, but I think I've covered enough. I believe you'll pick it up.
I hope so. Yeah. Okay, I have a book now that my coworker, sweet Lady Anne, was reading, and she kept talking about it, and I said, when you get through, can I borrow it? So I read it, and I absolutely loved it, called Same Kind of Different as Me.
I've read it several years ago. Wonderful.
Yes.
Keep going, girl.
And
wonderful.
It's written by two men, Ron Hall and Denver Moore. And the interesting thing is, Ron Hall grew up in a family that was lower middle class, kind of rough on the edges. And as he grew up, though, he did go to college, and he kind of fell into the profession of an art critique and finding art and selling art. And over time, he became a very internationally known art dealer, and had his own galleries and lived in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas. Just was a very well-off man and was married to a woman, Deborah, and they had 2 children. And they were very, like I said, they were well off, but he would kind of be doing some things on the side, and Deborah came to him about that, and they sat down and they had a talk, and they decided that they were really going to try to work on their marriage. They wanted to bring God into the marriage. She was already someone who was very dedicated to the Lord and was seeking His guidance. And Ron joined her in that. And so they started a mission in Fort Worth of helping the homeless. And it just so happens there was a man in the homeless community, Denver, that Deborah felt like was one day going to be a leader of the city, and he was going to help bring people to the Lord. Well, Ron always felt a little bit behind in Deborah's spiritual connection sometimes with the Lord, but he certainly respected and listened to her, and she told him, I want you to make friends with him. And slowly they did, and Denver told him one time he always thought about white people as fishers. And so Ron said, well, what do you mean by that? I'm not a fisherman. He said, well, a lot of white people, when they fish, they catch and release the fish. And he said, well, whenever we fished, if we caught it, it was ours for keeps. And he said, I sometimes think their relationships are like that, catch and release.
Oh.
So over time, they both realized in their hearts that their relationship would be lifelong. Now, Denver grew up in horrible circumstances in Louisiana, and it was during the 40s and 50s when actually slavery was almost continued, but in a different form. You would have people living on your land in these shacks, and they would work the fields, and they wouldn't get paid money. They would be given a little certificate that you had so much you could spend at the store. And the store was owned by the man that owned the land. So eventually what happened to Denver is he had so much heartache, saw so many horrible things, that one day he just hopped a train and left. And he became homeless in Fort Worth for many, many years. And after he met Ron and Debbie, got to know them, and grew in his relationship with the Lord, he started helping them. It is a wonderful story. There is some real heartache in it, but you learn so much about their relationship with the Lord as to how they handle this heartache. And I just have to read this little part in here, because C.S. Lewis is one of my favorite authors.
Yes.
And when Ron, Deborah's husband, was going through a very difficult time, was angry with the Lord and said he would tell him that. And that's what I do, and that's what I love, because he knows our hearts. He loves us anyway.
Yeah.
But this is what C.S. Lewis said with regard to a great sacrifice that he had to face in his life. He says, the tortures are going to occur. If they are unnecessary, then there is no God, or he's a bad one. If there is a good God, then these tortures are necessary for no even moderately good being could possibly inflict or permit them if they weren't. So in other words, it kind of comes down when you choose God, there's either the faith that you believe whatever comes to you in your life, He has control of, and you just know that even though sometimes it's not a good time, He's with you, bringing you through it, and it's for a reason. Highly recommend this book. It is wonderful. They have continued on together in the mission there in Fort Worth, and so I give it a 5 and recommend that you get it and read it. It will bless you and encourage you and strengthen your faith.
Wonderful, and I concur with all of that. I forgot to give stars for my first one.
Let me guess.
I would give I would give a 4. I give a 4. Sorry.
That's okay.
Right.
That's okay.
We have our different reasons.
We've kind of switched.
Yes.
I'm giving the 5s, you're giving the lowers. Okay.
I dropped something on the floor. I heard it. I don't know what it was. I think it may have been the little
It's the remote that you really probably wouldn't know how to work anyway, so that's okay.
Probably so right about that. Okay, my next one is by Susan Wiggs, The Summer Hideaway.
And Gail, let me just say, all of yours are books for keeps, aren't they?
Yes.
Great.
All of them were from our book haul. And my daughter has read Susan Wiggs, so she said, "Oh, Mom, I believe you're going to like her books."
Mm-hmm.
And this one is a series. It's a part of a series, so I may try to get some of the other books that are in the series.
Where does this fall? Kind of in the middle?
It's like number 7, I think.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a standalone. For all that I can tell, I don't know if some of the characters or if the place itself, because it's called the Lakeshore Chronicles. So maybe all of the books are centered around this particular place.
Right.
And it's in New York, a beautiful area near the Poconos. Lakeshore is the title of the lake there, the area there. And but the funniest thing is I opened the book and I looked at the very first page and I thought something was wrong with the book because it's like an advertisement seeking private duty nurse, and it tells all the qualifications that they're wanting for this private duty nurse. And I thought, well, now that's just very odd to be the first page of the book. And then I turned it and it says prologue. And I said, well, surely somehow it's going to fit in. And it did. Of course, it connected. But it starts out with Ross. He is just about to be able to leave his deployment in Afghanistan. He has been a pilot, the medvac, where they take the helicopter and get those
those that are badly injured.
Yes, and he has really, really spent some rough time. And it's time for him to be discharged and to go back home. And he is just so glad because he receives a telegram from the family that his grandfather, he is so close to his grandfather, George, is very, very ill. And so they want him to get on back. And
the service lets him leave.
Well, it's time anyway.
Oh.
So it's almost like it's a God thing that it's time for him to go back anyway, and he just can't wait to get there to be with his grandfather. Now, his grandfather and his uncle, Charles, they were born into wealth, wealthy family, the Bellamys. And so they were upper crust for everything, the best schools, the best...
the connections.
Oh, all the connections.
Jobs,
Yes,
yeah.
and they always would go in the summer to this lakeshore area, like I said, near the Poconos, for their summer vacation. They called it Camp Kyoga. So,
Sounds Indian.
Yes, and it was. And you think of like a summer camp, and in a way it was, but at the same time, most of the ones that came, the whole families that came, they came in their nice, cars, and they all had just the right kind of clothes to wear. And
was the facility, the home, kind of a little upper crust. It wasn't a rough cottage.
Even though it was a cottage, and there was a lodge where you could eat and gather together for games, or they would have skit night or whatever.
Sounds
which does
wonderful.
remind
A
me
siesta.
of yes, it does. But yes, it was a little bit on. But now the people that took care of the camp, the husband and wife, and he had a son and a daughter, they were just working class people. Okay. They made sure everything was just so and everything was clean, and when people would leave, they would go into the cottage, and they even had a garden and chickens, to provide for the food, the best of the food. And but their daughter Jane she was one of these with a lot of personality. And Charles and George ended up kind of befriending her and, doing things together, doing a little bit of exploring around the camp together. And of course, they were like, if mom or dad knew we were playing around with, the workers' children, they probably wouldn't want us to do that. But that didn't keep them from doing that. So they became friends. This was in the 50s, early 50s, it was actually late 40s that they were starting to go to the camp for their vacations, and the war was still going on. So the oldest son of that working class family, was called up to serve, and he was killed during World War II. This was during World War II. So that was a pivotal experience that just changed the mother for sure. The father, he as all, a lot of men are strong, and he, and then he had this younger daughter to take care of. But the mother she could not cope with it, and she tried, but she just really had a breakdown, and they had to put her away for a while. And so Jane was so, connected with her dad and with the camp, stayed there all the time, and the mother was off in a place, hopefully getting better.
Who is it that's ill and who is it that's coming back? I've lost track.
Okay, that's the mother. I'm sorry, and I'm probably rambling. No. Because that's the other thing about really all three of these books. It brings in history from, the grandparents. Right. And then you've got these youngsters here, and they grow up and get married and have children.
Generations are involved.
Yes, it is. And one really interesting thing that happens, and it's really important. George contracts polio one summer while they are at the camp. And he has to go into the iron lung. They have to leave, and of course everything is sterilized and taken out of the cottage, because
polio back then was almost a death
They had
sentence.
not found, Jonas Salk had not found the vaccine for it. So George, he survives. The next summer they come, and he's in a wheelchair. He cannot walk at all. And his brother, they want to have a good time at the camp like they always do. And Jane is the one that brings him out of himself, out of his shell, and said, look, we're going to keep exploring like we did last summer.
The worker's daughter helping the wealthier family's son.
Yeah. And here she's gone through, tragedy herself, and totally losing her one and only older brother.
Right.
But she is able to see that there are blessings that you can look for if you will just look for them. And so she really does help him come out of it. And then it just skips many years. He goes to Harvard, and his brother, they both go to Harvard and have this wonderful education. And they get married, they have children. Like I said, Ross, the soldier, is coming back. His father went into service, and he was killed in Vietnam. So he is really close to his grandfather. It's like his grandfather was his rock, So his grandfather is ill, and it is serious. That's why he has put that advertisement in. He does not want to have any treatment. He does not want to be treated
as an invalid, or
he thinks he's thinking back
normal.
to when he had. No, he doesn't want to close himself off.
Right.
He wants to live every day
to the fullest.
And so the qualifications, I didn't read them all. You have to read the book. Qualifications for the nurse that he wanted are, some of them are kind of comical and kind of unique, but I just loved it because he not only wants to have a good time, he wants to go back to this camp. He's got a bucket list of things he wants to do, but he also was looking for someone for this grandson, Ross. It's like he was just like, Lord, I know that he's going to come and he's going to stay with me because he's that one grandchild that's just so connected.
Did he?
And he did. And so you have to read. You just have to read the book. It's just so
you're not going to tell us if you
I'm not
going to
tell you. There are two things in here. There is a mystery behind the caregiver, the young Claire,
my word.
the
This
young
book
girl.
has everything.
It does. It really does. And there is also a couple of secrets that don't come out until, he's gotten sick and there's some forgiveness that has to happen, definitely, between George and his brother Charles, and he's not seen him in a long, long time.
And George is the one that had polio.
Yes.
And Charles is the one that went to the war, and he's coming home.
No, Charles did not have to go to war. No, George's son went to Vietnam because the war's over.
Okay.
Read the book, girl.
Excuse me.
Get this
book.
I'm not very. See, you're so much better at just explaining it.
I just leave out a lot because I can't remember it all. I can remember it, but it's hard for me to.
And I start getting into the story, and I need to stop right now.
You get so excited, and you're talking about, and you think that we know who you're talking about, and you go, and George and Scott, and I'm going, what? But hey. She loved the book. You can tell she did.
I would give it a 5. I would.
All right.
Absolutely.
So get that book. All of our books are so good.
And we just were grabbing them off the shelves, Carla, hoping that of course you would give me some ideas. And I would give you a few ideas.
And some of the authors' names sometimes.
Right.
But it is so exciting to pick up a book. And I'll tell you, all 3 of these, I knew absolutely nothing about the authors or anything like that, except for my coworker did recommend this one, and I really enjoyed it.
You recommended the first one, so
yes, we're going to get some coffee and be
It's
back.
a cold day here in Georgia.
Yes, it's all of 40. Okay, well, I tell you, this delightful tea that my sister has made is so good. I don't even know if I can do my book review. I just want to drink
and it makes you so warm inside.
And go dogs.
I'm getting me a Georgia Bulldog mug. Hopefully one that says back to back.
Back to back, because we are national champions both for
2 years in a row.
That's right, 22 and 23. Well, my last book today is called The Good Daughter, and it's by Jasmin Darznik. This was in my Books for Keeps. It is a nonfiction. It's pretty much an autobiographical, but it starts out with Jasmin going to see her mother, who lives in California, because Jasmin's father has passed away. Jasmin's father, Johan, was probably around 15 years older than her mom. And so while she's there helping her mom go through some of the personal items, this photograph falls. And she picks it up and she kind of recognizes the girl, but the girl looks to be about 13, 14 years of age, but she can see her mom's resemblance.
Right.
But there's a strange man in the picture. And so she asks her mom, she says, who is this man? Because I think this is you. And her mother says, well, it's not something that I really feel comfortable talking about. So she finishes up that day with her mom, and she doesn't press it. She leaves and goes back to her home. And in a few weeks, she starts getting these cassette tapes from her mom. And I think she ends up with 10 in all. And her mother is talking and telling her the story of her ancestry in Iran Iran. I said I was not going to say it that way. That's the way
Cassette
Americans
tapes
say it.
Kind of gets the era, doesn't it? Because if she was sending cassette tapes, it was what, 80s maybe, 90s. We were still using cassette tapes. Is that when the years that it was set?
Yes, this book was written in the early 2000s. So I don't know that for certain,
Right.
but so it starts out back with her grandmother, with Jasmin's grandmother. And this is such a culturally and historically wonderful, knowledgeable book. And I learned so much about the people of Iran. And it's true, her mother did marry at 13. And it was an arranged marriage. And her mother was actually one of the few girls that was in school. Her mother's father was determined that she would go to school, and she did, but they ended up going ahead and having her get married, and she had a baby within a year and named the little girl Sarah. Well, what happened was very early in the marriage, from the beginning, her husband, Lily is Jasmin's mother's name, and Lily had Sarah, her first daughter, in Iran. But her husband beat her horribly. And she decided after about a year that she knew she was going to be killed. So she went through what she had to get a divorce, which at that time and that culture was basically just taking yourself out of life. Nobody would probably ever marry you again. You were considered almost a prostitute at that point. And in Iran, during this time, and this starts out probably around the 1930s, 1940s, if you did not have a man to take care of you, either a husband or a father, maybe a brother, then you were normally just left like on the streets, because you had to be protected and taken care of financially by a man.
And she had that little baby Sarah. What did she do?
She had
with her?
Sarah, and she ended up giving Sarah up.
Oh, okay.
She ended up giving Sarah up because her father took Lily in. She could live with him. He allowed her to come live with him. He was not pleased about the divorce and all, but he understood. But he did not want Sarah to come. He said it would be so awkward with the family dynamics and everything. So she continued to see Sarah, but she had to keep it private. And her father did find out one day, and he just cut that out completely. So interesting, all of the rules and regulations that the cultures have, not necessarily laws, but something they went by almost as if it were a law. Well, what happens is Lily ends up going back to school while she's living with her father. But her father ends up dying suddenly. So she is left in that situation where, what am I going to do with my life? I really don't have any resources. And she does end up with, she has a brother, and he is living in another country in Germany and going to school. And so he says, well, why don't you come here, Lily? And I will help you get started out here. So she does. She goes to school to become a midwife, and she gets her degree, and she's probably in Germany 3 or 4 years, and she meets a man there, Johann, and he's not actually a German, but he and his family have lived there for quite a few years. So they go back. They actually end up going back to Iran. And while they are there, he becomes a Muslim, does all that he has to do to pass the codes to marry her. And they do get married, and they are fairly successful. She becomes a very high-end midwife in one of the hospitals there. Degrees from other countries mean a lot more in Iran than if you were have to get one there. Right. And then he is pretty much an entrepreneur type of person. He has been in engineering. He starts his own business of ready-mix concrete because they don't have that in Iran. But they go through good times and bad times, a lot of interesting dynamics with family members. Sarah does come back into her life somewhat, but Sarah is now almost grown, and she actually greets her mother in such a way that it's like she says, "You are a prostitute."
No.
And so things happen, and it ends up that Iran is fixing to go into the war that they had. And so they leave, Johan and Lily, and they take Jasmin with them, and they go to America. And Jasmin is 5. And when they get to America, they end up living in California. And her parents had sold everything they had in Iran, and they had just enough money. They bought this real kind of inexpensive, almost like we would call like a Motel 6 in California. And she has an interesting life there. Part of the time they live in the hotel, and then they finally can afford to get a little place. But it's just so interesting about all the different aspects of the Iranian culture, and then the German culture also, and then America, the third one, So I just loved it. Jasmin has written other novels. She is still living in America. I tried to find out if her mother, Lily, is still alive, but I'm not certain. And she does know about Sarah. She has never met Sarah. But great book. I mean, you just really feel immersed into a lot of the different cultures and history. So I give it a 5. Highly recommend it.
You have had 5.
I have had
all
3
of
5s.
yours. That's
Yes.
wonderful.
Yes.
Well, my last one about family issues and family secrets is Hidden History by Melody Carlson. And remember, when I pulled this one up out of our bag, I was so excited to find that Melody Carlson does write books for adults, and I had found that out, but I had never gotten one of her books. So here's one of it. She writes a lot of children's books, and I had bought several of those, and just loved her writing and loved the person that she chose to illustrate those books. And just a little side story, if you'll give me a minute, Carla. I know I tend to talk a little bit too much, but Christmas
It's so
Eve,
funny because I'm the one that's supposed to be the talker, but
Christmas Eve.
just in a comment.
Let me finish,
does
and
more
then
of
I'll
the
go
talking?
to the
That's
book.
okay, that's
But
okay.
Christmas Eve, I was able to have all the family and grands that are in the area here, not the ones in Iowa, to come over. And you were so gracious to leave a lot of Christmas categories that you had printed up. We did it for our siblings' party, and it was so much fun. So, we had the pages, and you have to get a book to bear down with the pencils. So Abby, one of my granddaughters, was sitting over near the bookcase, and she grabbed a book to put her page on, and she said, "Oh, Nanny, I remember you reading me this book, and it was so good." And it was one of the books by Melody Carlson for children. Yes,
that's wonderful.
Good character book. So, but this one is a story about a family, and when you open up the book, 3 sisters have finally attritioned back to the old home place, and it is in a small town of Pennsylvania. The oldest sister is Louise. The middle sister is Alice, and then Jane came along a little bit later. And so they have refurbished and completely redone the house. They've added rooms. They've added a lot to the garden. Their mother was a gardener, and it's now a bed and breakfast.
Oh, so
and
this is their old home place.
Yes,
where
it's
they
the old
grew
home
up.
place where they grew up. And so they are excited about it's becoming popular. They still have some things to do to finish it up and get it ready, but people are starting to come and stay there, and they just love the little town. It's one of those that you just walk around in cute little shops, and you can just walk to everything. And
What's the title,
the
Bill?
title is Hidden History.
I think you said it.
All right, and so I'm about to get to that. So they finally decide that it's about time to clean up the laundry room. They do a lot of laundry with a lot of rooms
Yes,
and people
yeah.
coming. And they never have actually, of course, it's on the back burner. Nobody goes in there but them. But Jane, the youngest one, she's an artist, and she has really done well with a lot of the artistic refurbishing of the beautiful home. And she says, okay, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to clean out. And then her sister Alice says, no, you are busy with the painting. And she also loves to cook. You do all the breakfast and everything. Let me get in there. I can clean up. Alice is a nurse. Her job is at a hospital. She's very accomplished nurse. And she says, I've got some time off. Let me clean up in there. So she does.
Well,
she
what's the third one doing?
Read
the book?
No. Thank you for bringing it up. She's not just, Louise is the oldest. She's a widow, okay? And she is in charge of the booking, all the details, the budget, and,
Okay.
paying the bills and in the little office area. She does that. Alice is never married. Jane has gone through a divorce. She lived in California, and it was sort of, one of those situations that just didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
And she was ready and willing to move back to a little small town in Pennsylvania. So that's sort of the backstory.
So they're all single sisters now,
Uh-huh.
for some reason or other.
Right. And Alice is just about through cleaning up. She's moved out things for Goodwill, and she's got things out for the trash. And there's this one box. She starts looking through it. There's old pictures of her mom and dad. Her mother had died early when Jane was just about 5 years old. So, and the father had just recently died in the couple of years before, and they decided to make the bed and breakfast. At the very bottom of the box, though, is a journal written by her father, and just so special. And didn't know that her father journaled. He was a pastor of the little church there in the town, and everyone loved him. He had to retire, and a new pastor had come to be there and had been there a few years. Everybody loved him, but she started reading a couple of pages and realized, this is special. This is really special, and I think there's some things in here that I didn't know about my dad. So she puts that aside, puts it over in the office, and part of the story is something to do with Alice and an old acquaintance that she had when she was in nursing school, who becomes a veterinarian. That's a little thread of the story. And then Louise, she is always trying to keep peace for the ones that would come in and want to either have something bad to say about
Their room,
yeah,
or
exactly,
the food,
yeah, or there's a great aunt, their father's no, not a great aunt. There's an aunt, their father's sister,
Mm-hmm.
and she's a character. She is the cutest thing, and she's always coming over and gossiping about this and that. So Louise is kind of she's the older one and sort of helps smooth that over. But I found myself looking so forward to the times that they were going to read from the journal.
Or do they do this like every afternoon?
No, they were very busy, okay, so they decided they were going to do it together, though. They were going to sit down in their father's office, which is now the office for the business, and Alice had found it, and they said, Alice, you be in charge of reading. And of course they would, Jane, the cook, she would fix tea and croissants or scones or whatever. And
where's my croissants and
yeah, I know, I've
scones,
got the tea fixed here. Let
and
me
it
take
is
a little
good.
sip.
I love it with this orange juice in it.
Yeah, it flavors it, doesn't it? Now, they did not know that their father had grown up in a very poor part of Pennsylvania. His father was not educated, very harsh, and just demanded that their father be, work on the farm. But he wanted to finich school. He wanted to go to school.
I bet that happened a lot.
Yes, during that time, and just so happens that he was intelligent, he was smart, he was capable, he loved school, and there was a teacher there, Mr. Dalton, that just really took him under his wings and encouraged him, and he was getting nothing but abuse and discouragement from his father. And his mother was ill. They didn't have money to get a doctor to come, and they got some, back then they would use herbs. There was somebody that knew about herbs and things.
Well, Gail, let's leave some for the reader.
Okay, all right, I know it, absolutely. So
I love her.
You've got to get this book and find out all the details about what happened with the father. He was an atheist, by the way, when he was writing the journal.
Yeah.
He hated God. He said, there can't be a God that would allow my life to be like this and my father to be so harsh. And his mother died because they couldn't get the doctor. So a lot of things come out. Some other secrets are resolved. There's some forgiveness. Here again, all three of the books, there was some secret, something that had happened in the past that someone harbors. And, until you release that, even if the other person does not accept your words of forgiveness or your words of, feeling,
it will help you.
Yes. Definitely.
So what we say, we're not Dr. Phil, but we are Dr. Carla and Dr. Gail. If you have secrets, go ahead, get them out, tell them.
Pray about it and find a scripture maybe that this one.
And let us know.
Is written she is a Christian author, so she does interweave a few scriptures in and out, and that's good. So I would give this one a 5.
All right.
Give this one a 5.
All right. Well, it's been delightful to be back. Yes. Reading is so much easier when you don't have a time frame to get it back. I have found that reading a little slower, but I'm enjoying them a little bit more because I don't have that in the back of my mind, kind of a schedule.
Get it to the library, or Libby's going to automatically send it back.
So thank y'all again for watching us. We are so excited. Our Christmas video really hit well, and I was thinking nobody's going to watch it. It's Christmas. It's a busy time of year, but I think y'all enjoyed it. We certainly enjoyed it.
We had so much fun. We did.
It makes me want to always do them in the bed, but I guess we have to get up and get dressed sometimes.
Yes.
So we will see y'all soon, but I do want to mention the producer that takes these videos and makes them ready to put up. My son is getting married in a couple of weeks, so I'll just have to see how quick I can spur him to get this up. We love
when
y'all.
This one's going to come up.
Yeah. Give us some comments, some thoughts, and see you soon.
Like and subscribe.
Yes, subscribe, do the little bell, and
we enjoy all of you listening to us, and hopefully we're not talking too much, but I think you enjoy it.
And Gail, what are we going to end with?
Go dogs!